this is a counting of the dollars saved, some $11.3 billion saved 4 or 5 days in. This was $8 billion yesterday when I linked it to get ready for this podcast. So it's growing pretty quickly.
Combat some of the just basic cost of living expenses that have raised dramatically. I didn't pull anything up specifically for this, but when you think about, what it used to cost, whether it's eating at Chick-fil-A or your typical trip to the grocery store for your family, 5 years, 6 years ago versus today, it's changed drastically.
Inflation is really the driver of all the political change that we are experiencing this week and over the last several months. Inflation is everything, and it impacts how all of us view the world one way or another. And Episode 26 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, boy, is it a heavy news week with the new administration coming into power and all sorts of executive orders and the like. I think in summary, the conditions on the field are changing, and we are seeing that drastic change play out over the course of a few days here. And I'm excited to start covering some of what's going on.
Yeah, I was listening to some coverage on a podcast of the inauguration, that you and I follow, Mark, the All In podcast. We haven't referenced it, like it a lot. But it was funny, man. They were observing or kind of loosely or just for fun placing bets about how many executive orders may be coming down the pipeline on day one. And I don't even know what the count is, honestly. I don't know if you do or not. But certainly, I think your summary of the conditions on the field changing reflect very much what seems to be going on everywhere I look.
There's two prevalent graphs that I see this week. The first is how many executive orders this administration is putting out there compared to the first term, and also the other most recent presidents, but also the number of pardons by presidents I'm seeing. So those are the two graphs I seem to see every which way. So what a week.
Boy, crazy for sure. I used to do, I still do a little bit, but some tax appeal hearings where people go in and appeal their taxes. And years ago, it used to be that they'd bring in subdivisions with 100 lots in them or something, and you'd have to go sign every single one of those. Like whether you decided that the value should be adjusted or not, you had to go sign all of these appeal forms or whatever. I finally made a stamp so I could just stamp the stupid things with my signature. I don't get the sense that the president has, adopted an official stamped signature necessarily. Maybe he has. I don't know, but that's a lot of signing, if nothing else, going on this week for him.
If anything, it feels like it'd have to be a very large and dark stamp. If you've seen his signature, it seems to take the whole page with a Sharpie in some way. So
yeah,
jumping in, I think the first thing that I'm sure there is plenty of reason, and forgive me for not seeing the other side there, that I'm thinking that we all as citizens can get excited about. I think we all watch this debt ceiling raising sort of out of control exponentially and picking up speed as it's going. And in the way that democracy ends up working, where people are voting their pocketbooks and politicians are getting elected by selling more gifts from the government, you see this perpetual flywheel and just getting bigger and bigger. And I look at it, I mean, it's not something that I think about much because I felt like I can't do very much about it, but it just doesn't feel good for the next generations, the health of the country, et cetera. What a interesting way that it has come to pass, this government expense reduction initiative, and I'm excited about it, and I'm hopeful. I'm skeptical that any progress can be made one way or another. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your skepticism, and I think I hear a lot of people that are, at least reports of people that are kind of inside the Beltway in Washington, where that same level of skepticism. Yeah, Elon and DOGE may want to come in and do this stuff, but they're not insiders. They don't know how the political system works. And I think that, even President Trump in his first term, had commented about not fully understanding how things were done, in Washington. I don't think I wouldn't want to take the bet against Elon and an initiative that he's pushing. I mean, I legitimately think that he's not going to put his name behind and put as much effort into something without doing everything within his power to make it happen. I think that there's this accountability in government finance and spending that hasn't been much of a focus. Nobody's wanted to talk about it until recently. It seems like it's starting to impact, or I've heard questions around the financial strength of the U.S. government and concerns around, maybe they can't keep doing this forever and something's got to give. And so eliminating waste and, just lining people's pockets without something to show for it feels like the responsible thing to do. And I think with the people that are involved, it's got a better chance of being successful than not, is my take.
Well, if this DOGE committee is anything, they are consistent with their mission by already reducing by half the leadership amongst the group, as Vivek Ramaswamy. I think I've never said his name out loud, but I think I got it there. Evidently has left the committee one way or another. Interesting stuff. So it's fascinating to watch, and I'm truly excited about it. And frankly, I'm also worried that even if success is found, I think this committee is being sunset, or this initiative, within 2 years or something. So it's not going to be around very long. So it is slash and dash maybe. But it does also feel like the next administration's coming in will just add right back to whatever was destroyed. And I think you're seeing that even with a lot of Trump's initiatives. They're specifically undoing what the prior administration put together. So what's the next administration going to do? Undo whatever they want to undo. And so it feels like that's possible here if infrastructure changes aren't made to the way we expand government expense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that was my thought, even as you were talking about that, Mark, is if there are enough shocking revelations of just fraud and abuse that come to light, that gain some momentum for it to continue. I hope for that I hope that we get to a place where we actually care about balancing a budget and being responsible with the funds coming in. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think you had found an interesting tracker on progress being made on that front.
You bet. Let me pull that up for those that haven't seen it. Jeff and I thought that this would be an interesting thing to point out if you hadn't seen it before. This is the U.S. debt clock. This is I was like, I figured, Jeff, that I ought to research a little bit of the background of this if we're going to put it up on the podcast in case it's some extremist from one angle or another. I don't think that it is. But this debt clock is a transformation from a physical clock that was put somewhere in New York, Times Square-ish, from Seymour Durst. He was a real estate developer, came out of the Great Depression and been carried on by his son, and then transferred online here and added a bunch of additional categories. But this is the U.S. national debt. Many of our viewers may have seen at least pieces of this before, but I wanted to highlight, and I'll start monitoring this now because I'm excited about the expense reduction initiatives. And if you can see, I'm not sure that my cursor will show up here, but at the top left, you will see a yellow DOGE clock. And this is a counting of the dollars saved, some $11.3 billion saved 4 or 5 days in. This was $8 billion yesterday when I linked it to get ready for this podcast. So it's growing pretty quickly. But through my research, it does seem to be connected to real-time actual data on all of these fronts here, and is a really interesting gauge on the progress that is or isn't being made.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun to see, some of the movement. And I'll tell you, Mark, I'm not used to looking at such big numbers. I keep having to count the number of commas that there are in these. Are we talking about billions or trillions or something less than that? But interesting to see how it's all put together. I hope that your research, has borne out that this is actually legitimate. I'm not seeing any like Russian writing or something. So I don't think it's a misinformation campaign. If it is, then we'll apologize and eat crow at some point in the future. But it's interesting to see, some sort of quantification of what is out there. I see, total U.S. debt, if I'm reading that right, is 100 trillion. Is that right? Interest on the national debt at 1 trillion is consistent with what I hear, kind of reported and whatever. But some of these just really interesting, and saved $3 billion overnight, on the DOGE initiative. That's not a bad start for sure. And a lot of interesting stats that show up on here.
Man, there is. There's a lot of really interesting trackers on this, Jeff, and I've just happened to fall into. We've referenced Lex Fridman in his podcasts, which are really interesting 3-hour academic interviews, or often more academic than what you'd find in the mainstream. And there's a recent one. I think the lady's author's last name is Burns, but it is covering Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman. She wrote biographies on both. And I've made it through the Milton Friedman portion, and just learning kind of a little more about how impactful his views are to our policies here. And in this U.S. M2 money supply is really the critical role. And that is the velocity of money, or the amount of money available or liquid within the government. So I think this is stuff like not in savings accounts, that banks are holding one way or another. And this is, I think, generally a direct tie into inflation and not. And so just kind of interesting to see a tracker that is running here in a comparison to some time ago. So that can be found at the bottom left of your screen in the green. So just to know that it's out there, I guess, is what I would suggest. There also is an interesting home sales for the real estate minded viewer, but it's just noting the pace of home sales for the year and a number of other things. So anyway, it's not working right now, but a running show of new construction starts, home sales, and I think this stuff is tracked. So anyway, Seymour Durst is a real estate tycoon, and is sort of famous for walking to his office every day for his whole career, and kind of came out of the Great Depression, and so was just understood the value of the penny or the dollar, and built this together because he was getting sickened in 1989 by the rise in spending. So interesting. A little background there.
Well, it's fun to see the data behind something that is happening, and this definitely quantifies it. We can put a link to it in the show notes, but I think it was usdebtclock.org. Is that the website for it, Mark?
That is it.
I'll just note too, as we are transitioning a little bit, I started that Lex interview as well, but just really interesting. We didn't plan this. We didn't even talk about the fact that you had gotten into that a ways too, but as I thought about, as I'm listening to that interview, and I'm not quite as far into it as you are, a lot of what we do in valuation is an economic analysis, kind of at the micro level, if you're just trying to put a value on a single property. But these principles of economics really apply to what happens in residential real estate. And that was one of the early takeaways that I had in listening to the discussion. It's been several years, but if you haven't heard some of Milton's interviews and conversations and stuff, there are a number of them on YouTube and otherwise. Really, really interesting guy. I mean, I think very well articulates his perspective and kind of understanding of the economic world, and would recommend it to anybody if you're inclined that way, to just listen to a few of the interviews. It's one of the things I'm coming around to a little bit, Mark, and I don't know if you've had experiences like this or not, but it's so easy to listen to what other people say about something or someone, but getting it from the source it's just, you just can't replace it. I'll listen to, an ESPN analyst about what happened in a game last night. Well, if I happen to have watched the game, I have way better context of, that's kind of what happened, but that's not exactly how I saw it, versus if I didn't watch the game, I got, whatever they're telling me, happened without really understanding. And so as I've listened to some of Milton's, firsthand debates and kind of lectures or whatever, and I haven't gone super deep into it, but it's been really fun. It was kind of a passion project a number of years ago that you might find some interest in as well.
That sounds great. Boy, that point really hit home for me, that getting the news or the assessment straight from the source, just watching these presidential debates over the last, 3 or 4 cycles, I would come away from watching the debate and then listen to the talking heads like, that's not what happened at all, on both sides, and it was always the shock value. Oh, he got destroyed, she got destroyed. No, that's not really what happened at all. And so, everybody is kind of twisting to their own liking what's happening there. So getting information straight from the source is really critical.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, great. Well, Jeff, maybe a little bit out of order, but it did seem to tie directly to this expense reduction thing, and then tying this in, as you were saying, to the work we do in residential real estate and appraisal, is this return to work initiative, an executive order from the new administration. This has interesting impacts on a lot of different levels. You want to cover some of those with us here?
Yeah, we were joking, or at least commenting on how many executive orders were signed, but a few of them really, caught our attention, certainly mine as we looked at them. And this one that President Trump signed of ending the work from home and hybrid work, options that, at least at the federal level, it got me wondering, and I don't know, Mark, if you think it's, terribly analogous, to what Elon did with Twitter or not, but I saw when Elon bought Twitter, and, drastically reduced headcount. If people weren't making meaningful contributions to the code and to the company, they were just getting rid of them. And I think he proved that you could go cut, headcount and make an unprofitable company profitable again. That all of a sudden kind of came in vogue, and other tech companies decided that, hey, maybe making money after all is a good idea, and we can cut waste and expense. I wonder if we'll see a similar trend, and I've seen a little bit of this maybe with some bigger tech companies either scaling back or ending altogether the work from home, but this additional kind of momentum with the federal government saying, hey, we're pulling back those accommodations and we're not allowing people to work from home or even hybrid in the different organizations in which they employ people. It seems like that may be the starting of a trend here, or at least the kind of gaining of momentum of that trend.
Yeah, this efficiency side of things, and really, I think this is ultimately a AI momentum as well. Where you've got each individual worker as more productive using the tools of AI. I think that's going to be true of appraisers, as we move through. But you've got the Twitter runs, even though 80% of the workforce is slashed, and I think it probably is reasonable to assume that the government can run with a pretty material reduction in staff, especially if tech is used. Where right now, reports are that tech is 20, 30 years old or more, using DOS applications to run the government, which isn't unsurprising. So, so this has impact on a couple of things. You've got largely empty offices that are out there, but I think are being held because those workers are at home and need to come back at some point. I'm guessing is the general outlook, or has been the general outlook. And I think you're going to get a real assessment of what's needed and what isn't as folks are returning back to work. Then you have expense reduction initiatives. We've talked about this on podcasts that go, but how does this end up affecting the housing market? You've got people that are looking for work and might need to relocate. So you've got movement in selling a home and buying a new one in a new location. And you also have the really difficult scenario whenever you have expense reductions, which is people were making money and are out of a job and aren't making money and need to sell or need to deal with the mortgage that has suddenly become difficult to manage. So, I think that I don't think these are going to be real small numbers, even if just from a federal level, but things that we might see in trickle down to our space.
I think that's right, and one of the implications that'll happen there is if this continues, to where you've got to be on site working, whether in the federal government or private enterprise. We saw during COVID in this work from home remote environment a massive outflow of population from big population centers, from New York, San Francisco's, LA's, to places that were more affordable, to places where people wanted to live that weren't as congested and crowded. Well, if this employment trend, continues to change course again, are we going to see a net migration back into the some of these big hubs and city centers? And will some of the housing and value impacts in rural or quasi-rural areas, at least smaller towns that have been impacted by a lot of people coming in with, maybe bigger city incomes, but seeking either an improved quality of life or not as much congestion or whatever. If you have to go back to maintain those jobs, I don't think everyone will, but I think a lot will. And will we see the flow go the other direction? I'm not seeing data suggesting that's the case yet, but that would be one of the natural consequences, I think.
That would. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's something to monitor here and think through, and how that, especially in areas either where your area of focus was the destination of work from home, better quality of life move, or you're in a government employment center. I think will have big impacts, or have the potential for big impacts. But we have anxiously been awaiting the director announcement from the administration, and talking a lot about conservatorship and privatization of the release of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, in the possible trend. We spoke with Scott DiBiasio in October about this being possibly a Trump initiative if we got there. And just been kind of observing the different steps that could lead to or maybe could be breadcrumbs to a move to privatize. And most recently this week, we have Bill Pulte announced in as the FHFA director. So my looking at it, Bill Pulte from Pulte Homes, he's, I think, the son of the original founder of Pulte Homes, a large national builder. Never been in government before. Some see that as a sign of kind of a push from FHA heads to privatization. Really interesting there. And I think the second notable thing is that we talked about this with Scott DiBiasio, that if Trump were to win the election, that housing supply and initiatives to build new housing was going to be maybe 4 million homes, something like that, might be an important initiative to help affordability of homes generally. And Bill Pulte, while I don't read is directly related to the Pulte Homes at this stage, is chairman of Pulte Capital Group, which is a private equity fund solely focused, as far as I can tell, on investing in companies that provide support for home builders. So window companies, HVAC companies, that sort of thing. And so very much new construction centered perspective for the new FHA head.
Yeah, I do wonder, Mark, what the implication will be in terms of, releasing Fannie and Freddie. But one of the things that we've talked a little bit about, and that I just observe, generally, is that when the government wants to do something with good intentions, in this case, improve access to home ownership or increase home ownership rates, they have a lot more levers to pull on the demand side, on the demand side, in terms of, whether it's artificially adjusting interest rates or providing assistance for first-time home buyers or tax credits for interest rates or for interest expense, or they can do a lot of stuff to influence the demand. But what I haven't seen is them do a lot to help influence the supply. And I think what Bill, is that his name?
It is.
You help me with an acronym, I'll help you with names, or vice versa, and we'll get through this. But with his experience, or at least investment in supply side, for residential construction, I would expect that there at least will be a push or an initiative on that front to try to help increase the supply, and not just the demand. And I'm seeing some other things, and we'll probably pivot to this in just a minute, from the Trump administration addressing, affordability, but also addressing the reduction of unnecessary restrictions that kind of hold back the supply or add to the costs. One of the things that you and I have talked a little bit about is building code requirements and like the added incremental cost to try to conform to current building code requirements versus what has been there in the past. And if we can get enough supply into the market, I think the affordability issues start to resolve. If all we do is add more fuel to the fire on the demand side, it's hard to think that you're in the long term really going to address affordability issues. Yeah,
amen to that. And there are knowledgeable people, it seems, on both sides of this camp, but I am definitely in the undersupplied U.S. housing stock and really coming out of the GFC. great financial crisis, 2008 plus. I mean, we lived through this where there was not a single lot being developed around the country for about 3 years. You couldn't get financing to do it. It was just such a mess from 2010, 2013, and we never made up for that. And it seems like such a long time ago, Jeff, but just before COVID, the problem was first-time home buyers were getting out-competed for the limited stock that was in inventory that was available by all cash buyers, whoever they were, whether it was corporate or not, crypto guys, I don't know, but man, if you were a first-time home buyer with a minimal down payment, good luck winning an offer. That was the environment we were in heading into COVID, and I think all of that is a supply shortage symptom. I think more supply is where we need to go.
You bet. And so it'll be interesting to see if the new FHFA director implements policies that, significantly impact that. I wouldn't be surprised, for that to be the case. And I know that's not the only initiative with kind of this DOGE effort of not only reducing expense and cost structure, but also, regulation and unnecessary regulation that holds back or adds costs unnecessarily. Not that the government's spending, but that's causing private enterprise to have to incur in order to bring product to the market.
Jeff, I've listened to a lot of podcasts recently, just always trying to stay informed for this one. But I think it was Dr. Mark Calabria being interviewed by October Research, something like that was suggesting, whether 30 or 80,000, maybe it was $30,000 of code requirements, that are overlaid on new construction, which further limits. And you mentioned this in talking about these initiatives, and I think these are some of the things that can assist supply getting onto the market is reducing that. And I think the problem that I heard stated was that the 2019 or 2021 code is a requirement for a lot of like FHA loans, for instance, and many states, something like 31 of them, require only the 2009 code, so not the fully updated deal. And so you've got FHA requiring code build out that the state itself doesn't require, and all the problems, and that's $30,000+ of overlay to save a few dollars on electricity and a month or whatever it is. So some low-hanging fruit, it feels like, to be able to help builders build.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if I remember that conversation correctly, it's exactly what you talked about, Mark, is you're adding, $30,000+ on average. And of course, it depends, on the home being built, but $30,000 to the upfront price tag to save, not very much, dollars, tens of dollars, maybe a month. Just the financial analysis there is that you never recoup that additional cost. You'd be better off building to the less restrictive code, saving that money and spending an extra $10 or $20 a month on, energy costs. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it was something on that order. And I see people do similar things, in some areas with like with solar panels. In fact, I just looked at a place not very long ago where they had spent like $60,000 putting these solar panels and batteries and stuff in the house, which is great. They were excited to have, but it ended up saving them, because they have relatively low power rates, $100, $150, maybe $200 a month. And just that rate of return is not very good if it's just a financial analysis. And these building codes have had the same, very same impact, but completely out of people's control. At least you can control if you want to put solar panels on your house or not. You don't have any control whether you build to the current mandated, building code or not. And so that price just gets passed on and impacts the affordability.
Yeah, Jeff, it would be fascinating to talk, maybe having former AI president Sandy on to talk a little bit about this solar kind of conundrum, because I think you often run into that, and she is the kind of quote unquote queen of green. It would be really interesting to hear her perspective and cover solar a little bit, because I've seen appraisers like on Twitter or X, as I'm watching, that say, man, no appraiser that appraises homes with solar would do it for themselves on their own home. And I'm not sure that's exactly true or informed. But it is it's an interesting analysis from you and I's unique perspective that I think we can bring.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not even opposed to solar. I would like to have it. Frankly, it's just a cost structure that if your sole analysis is financial, it looks a little different than if, hey, I want backup because I don't have a sustainable grid, or I want to, be a good steward of environment, or I mean, like there are multiple motivations and probably reasons to do it. But I'd love to have a conversation with Sandy for sure.
You bet. Well, you had mentioned this, and this is kind of in connection to a number of the things. This had no direct initiative one way or another, but I have to tell you, Jeff, this one spoke to me in the 2 years of struggle that I've been in. Not just from like little housing activity, which my business relies on, is just movement in the housing space, but also the general cost of living. Not just the home affordability, but speaking to just general inflation at the grocery store. And I got a family of 5, and man, cost me $75 to go eat a Chick-fil-A. It's not easy these days, but it did just an overall edict or mission to government agencies of where we're trying to go. The conditions on the field are changing a little bit, if they can, and if that can impact anybody or anything one way or another. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think it definitely speaks to what he campaigned on. And I'll just, if anybody's listening, I'll read this brief little summary that we are sharing on the screen here. Delivering emergency price relief for American families and defeating the cost of living crisis. Speaking to the rapid increase in pricing across the board. Like you said, of course, one of the things I found, Mark, is that I've got a family of 6. It doesn't cost as much to eat at Chick-fil-A if you just don't take the kids with you. So that might be a one tip for averting the cost crisis that they're referencing here. You just can't have any leftovers in the car. Your kids figure it out, and then you're in trouble when you get home. But I wished that there was a little bit more like detail or directive around it. But like you said, it definitely is setting the stage for what is an effort to try to combat some of the just basic cost of living expenses that have raised dramatically. I didn't pull anything up specifically for this, but when you think about, what it used to cost, whether it's eating at Chick-fil-A or your typical trip to the grocery store for your family, 5 years, 6 years ago versus today, it's changed drastically. And of course, COVID and the response to it, all of those things, there are a number of factors that led to why we are where we are. But the reality is, the financial analysis is that it costs a lot more today to do the basic things than it did, 6 years ago before the pandemic.
Jeff, the Lex Fridman interview covering Milton Friedman and eventually Ayn Rand, haven't gotten there yet, but notable. She wrote an essay. This author wrote an essay, I think, in the New York Times or somewhere, that was making the argument that inflation is really the driver of all the political change that we are experiencing this week and over the last several months. Inflation is everything, and it impacts how all of us view the world one way or another. And if anybody was not in favor of major change politically and all of that, her advice was, I think in this essay, was that pay better attention to inflation and don't forget that the more you print and all of this is going to lead to kind of revolutionary change one way or another, and that will be true if what many think, and I think she thought, that Trump's policies are going to be inflationary or have the real chance to. When we talk about tariffs and on and spending generally, that if this leads to inflation, it's going to have the same impact on him in the next election, one way or another. Inflation is running everything and runs everything and has since monetary policy. And so I think we've been living that, and the things you and I are feeling at the Chick-fil-A window, and whether or not our kids get to eat beans and rice or Chick-fil-A is all tied to this inflation stuff. And of course, that is affecting the affordability of homes and then creating the stillness, because nobody can get out of the mortgage that they've already got, and they got to sit still whether they like it or not.
Yeah. That's exactly right, and kind of speaks to that lock-in effect that we've been observing as a result of the rapid increase in interest rates in the last couple of years. But I don't know what will ultimately come of this initiative, Mark. And I think you're right, and make the interesting point. Trump was not, fiscally restrained in the first go around. Now, with the DOGE committee and effort, will there be some change in spending, policies this go around? We'll see. I wish I could remember the exact quote, that came up on that Lex podcast, but I think Milton Friedman had said something to the effect that inflation is always everywhere, or something to that effect. And my problem is I listen to these things while I'm like at the gym. I'm a nerdy appraiser listening to a stupid podcast about economic theory, trying to bench press the bar or something. And so I don't like jot things down, and I'm doing something else. I don't remember them as well as I wish I did. But it spoke exactly to what you what you were talking about, is that it is this inflation that drives everything. And I think he called the stagflation era of the 70s and into the 80s and stuff, which kind of solidified him as a real economist of note. But I don't know what these next 4 years will bring. Right now, there's a lot of optimism and hope and excitement for what's going forward. But if DOGE is not successful, I could see a perpetuation of inflation, that eventually will bring real change. I'm just hoping that real change is brought now and not 5 or 6 or 7 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And I think some of the specifics, I don't know if I'll be able to find it exactly here on the show, but to read, this generally says all agencies shall include pursuing appropriate actions to lower the cost of housing and expand housing supply. And dang, that is pretty direct, although not having specific policies. And MBA, Mortgage Bankers Association President Bob Brooksmith stated that Federal Housing Administration, as a suggestion along the lines of this edict, should eliminate its life of loan premium requirements, strongly consider a reasonable reduction to FHA mortgage insurance premium levels. So I think just an example of maybe a small or large thing that can help home affordability. And I had seen someone, I don't know if they were appraised or not, in the same thread that I was watching, was suggesting that it probably would help and go a long way to have appraisal requirements more similar between conventional and FHA. Jeff and I would be strong supporters of that, as long as conventional appraisal requirements are where the move is towards, and eliminate us carrying ladders in our car. Just a note to all, let's get there.
Boy, amen to that. But I think a good illustration, though, of this pullback of, let's move the regulation to a lower common denominator, not a higher one. And hopefully that impacts the cost structure and the supply across the board. I'm looking forward to see, what actually comes of that.
You bet. Well, Jeff, something I thought it was an interesting little interview short that I saw on Yahoo from Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan that was making a point that I thought is just a good reminder, and it rings true to me, whether it's actually true or not. I think that is all the test that needs to be passed to make it on market moves, is it rings true to me. But was suggesting that the Fed may have to react to Trump. And I think that's a minor shock statement, like Trump is going to tell them to lower rates and they're going to do it. And I don't think, that's not what he's saying. But his point was to serve as a reminder that the Fed is to look at the conditions on the field and manage unemployment and the velocity of money, or the availability of money. And that when the conditions on the field change, and they have changed drastically here over the last 4 or 5 days, that it is the Fed's job to react to that. And so one rate cut for the rest of the year in 2025, or two, or whatever they've said, as the conditions on the field were what they were when they said that, could change quite a bit. And it's a reminder that the Fed's job is to react to the conditions on the field. I don't know if that's hope or not, but I think that is how it is. And I'm sure the Fed is watching how the market reacts to all of these conditions on the field changing.
Yeah, and the messaging I hear coming from Jay Powell, the current chairman, is that it has always been, we're going to assess basically the conditions on the field, like you say. We're going to see what's happening with jobs, with inflation data, with with the various economic reads that they have, and then react or adjust accordingly. I do recall a number of news articles in the first Trump administration, where Trump was saying, "Hey, I want lower interest rates," and the Fed was pushing back a little bit, saying, "Well, we're not just going to change them arbitrarily because the president wants it. If the conditions on the field or the economic circumstances, support and justify it, then we will." And certainly they did, as one of the primary tools for addressing, concerns coming into COVID and that sort of a thing. And then inflation starts to ramp up, in part because of money dumped into the economy. And then, their reaction is to increase the rates, significantly. And they've started, a process of pulling that back. So I read it, Mark, as them responding to the conditions on the field. I don't know, how much of a shouting match, they may get into around, change of interest rates. Lower interest rates will help with housing affordability and, help get people into homes. But again, I think that's kind of a demand side, issue. And so you got to have the supply follow it if it's going to have the impact. But I like that you brought this up. It was an interesting perspective, from the Bank of America chief, just kind of restating what the Fed's mandate or policy is, and how they should be kind of reactionary as opposed to trying to drive policy specifically.
Yeah, you bet. Well, it'll be interesting to watch. I generally, Jeff, we are trying to keep up with the real estate financial news of the time, and there's so much movement and actually, a lot of headlines that are detailing the pain that participants that are trying to survive in this high interest rate, low activity world that we've been in. It's just, I think you don't hear the stories of those that are surviving, but most are probably struggling, whether it's an individual loan officer or realtor that left the industry and go quietly, or whoever it is. But we did have a story yesterday that was breaking, and a lot of our listeners probably haven't heard of this group. Divvy Homes is a rent-to-own kind of tech startup out of Silicon Valley, I think. And they had, I think, found 15,000 renters in what they were doing and ended up creating about 2,000 homeowners out of it. But it is just a creative financial structure where you get into your kind of quote unquote dream home with a manageable rent payment that is all the while earning your down payment to ultimately own the home. So it is a rent to own sort of solution. And these folks just sold to Brookfield, I think it is. And they sold for $1 billion. That's a lot, and would on its face seem like a successful build and exit. I don't really think that's the case at all. I think Adina Heffitz, I'm sure I'm saying that, I'm butchering it, but the CEO was talking about how difficult the last 2 months or 2 years have been, the most difficult of her professional career, and was trying to find a landing spot for the business, the renters, and so on, and was happy to find this. But I certainly read that as, avoided bankruptcy and got out of it. And I think that's probably where this ended up. It was a trying to survive and figure out how to hand off. It had a market cap of $2 billion somewhere along the line, so sold for half. I'm guessing most of that is real estate value, if I understand the business model well enough.
Yeah, you had pointed this company out to me a couple of years ago, Mark, at one point, and such an interesting concept of finding a creative way to help people get into home ownership, even if it's not day one, but identifying the home and then building the down payment and the ability to transition, seamlessly from a renter to a homeowner. The part that really stood out to me was, I think, what you highlighted. She put out a kind of a public facing message, kind of announcing this acquisition and stuff. But I felt like she was probably pretty candid and authentic in saying that, these last 2 years had been the most difficult of her professional career. And it just speaks to what you had, led in with, that there's still a lot of pain and difficulty navigating this, this real estate space with the transactions, volume as low as it is. I first saw the price of $1 billion exit. It sounded like, man, that sure went well. And as I read about it a couple years ago, I was interested. I was like, crap, that's probably not something that would be a bad investment. And it turned out that I'm kind of glad that I didn't invest in it, I think. But it's hard navigating these kind of difficult times, and I think we see that in a lot of these situations. And this certainly seems to be just one anecdote of what's going on out there.
I certainly, we feel her pain, and as I read, it's higher interest rates for longer, and I don't know how that ended up playing. I don't know if there were creative financing, banking on lower rates to help kind of creatively get these people from rent to own. But boy, just another one that didn't work out. So with a good intention, it seems. I just as a note that I did see the D.R. Horton CEO had noted rising inventory in Texas and Florida and its impact on their sales, higher concessions. I think home builders in these areas are definitely continuing to feel it, and we've been talking about that each week on the episode here. And I do think when you couple that with the Bill Pulte as FHA director and these initiatives for building, what I think is that the home builder is happy to withstand a momentary blip. They built into this increased inventory, and I don't know if I'd say we're happy to do it. I think they had systems in place to do it and let it continue, because I think they think this is going to be a golden age for home builders over the next 4 years. That's what I think. And so, stock prices are doing really well. Some of this may be priced in, but I think home builders are going to be celebrated, and a pathway is going to be cleared for them to really go gangbusters between here and 2030.
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. And we've been talking about affordability challenges, supply side needs. The builders obviously are poised, to be able to take advantage of that. So yeah, I hope that it can be successful. I do wonder, it's interesting that those states, Florida and Texas specifically, were cited as being the ones that are soft for them. I just wonder, is that a slowing of the exodus from, the New Yorks and the Californias, and not as many buyers coming in as they had maybe, projected or predicted, in those, in the Florida and Texas markets specifically. I don't know that. I don't have data that, that suggests that necessarily, but, I am curious as to how this return to work policy, kind of across the board might start to impact, state by state, net migrations and consequently the demand for housing in those states.
You bet. Well, Jeff, if you'll indulge me on a non-real estate topic, but just something on my mind that I think people ought to be, I don't know if they see it well as I have here recently, but it's just continuing the conversation of artificial intelligence. One of the many initiatives and executive orders is the Stargate thing, a $500 billion infrastructure investment by the U.S., which sounds phenomenal. I mean, we should do everything as a country we can to maintain leadership in artificial intelligence. Seems like there's all the reason in the world to do that. We're well positioned to do it, and we need to make sure that we keep that lead. So that all sounds great, and I'm excited for it. When artificial intelligence on some level is going to happen to us as real estate professionals instead of us happening to it, there's a lot of fear about what's coming tomorrow and that sort of thing. And I am really struck. It's become kind of evident to me, and I think it's kind of from I think it's Bill Gurley on the BG2 podcast that originally pointed this out months ago, but how much of a lot of these AI guys are salesmen as spokespeople for their industries. And in this Stargate thing, for instance, I think it was Larry Ellison that was out talking about how they were going to now be able to develop, analyze a cancer individually with AI, develop an mRNA vaccine to immediately go address that specifically, and all the world is going to be over cancer. And I quickly see people coming out saying, oh, I mean, that's silly. I mean, that's that is not how this is going to work. We've known that for a lot of years. And I think the same thing in sort of salesmanship is there on the cognitive tasks, artificial general intelligence, all these things. I'm sure that it is going to come up on us quick, but there is a whole hell of a lot of salesmanship that is ultimately a fear-based sort of thing, like the world is changing tomorrow. And I think it's very, very effective because it appeals to the uncertainty that humans all get cautious about and they can't do much about on a lot of levels. And so I guess a word of caution, and if you view a lot of what these artificial intelligence guys are saying, that are the ones that are raising money and talking to venture capitalists and doing all these things, you can pick out the salesmanship that's going on there.
Yeah, that really resonates, Mark. I think that certainly we're seeing an increase in the pace of change and kind of rate at which, it was what, 3 years ago that ChatGPT first, took the stage by storm. It's evolved and gotten, dramatically better in a relatively short period of time. You and I would probably both recognize the AOL dial-up tone, like that you used to have to call to get onto the internet. And that thing didn't just disappear, in a 1 or a 2 day period. Like, it takes time for whether it's internet transition, whether it's mobile transition. I remember looking at the first iPhone that my friend got and looking at aerial images on his phone. I was like, holy crap, that is really cool. I didn't know that, that was possible. I didn't even know that I wanted something like that until I did. But not everybody had an iPhone, for overnight. It feels, in retrospect, it looks like it came on, in very quick order, and it probably did. I think your perspective, resonates on that level, that we think historically about change as happening overnight or very quickly, but it's an evolution. AI, I expect, will be no different. I see it changing quickly, and it's here at some level, but I don't think tomorrow it's the cure for cancer, or it's the thing that's doing all of the tasks for me, and now I have to figure out what it means to be a human and why I even exist. But to your point about salesmanship, I hear those conversations from some of these AI guys as well, and maybe that day will come, but it's not going to be today, tomorrow, this year, or next, I don't think.
Amen. And then on the flip side, just to be fair and balanced, it was leaked that OpenAI had requested a closed door meeting with the government, wherever that is, and that the item covered was that the AI has figured out how to make very large calculations very quickly. And it makes all of our internet security, passwords, Bitcoin encryptions solved, in an enormous danger to internet security and all that we rely on right now. And it does feel like that is quite possible, with the exponential power that we're getting from solving equations and numerous equations kind of beyond comprehension all at once.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. And there are these implications that are just hard to project. I think that these different waves change things in ways that, in some ways that were projected, in other ways that weren't projected, and didn't make changes that some people worried about. And this cybersecurity thing is a very interesting, aspect, Mark. And I'm not well versed enough to know all of the implications on it, but it's certainly something, to be aware of. The 1 billionth of a Bitcoin or whatever, pathetic little fraction that I happen to own is probably not at much risk if it gets hacked and goes from $5 to $0 or whatever. But I think there are some legitimate security concerns that worth being aware of, and hopefully we're not all compromised yet. Maybe we are.
Beautiful. Well, Jeff, I think that'll wrap it up. Really appreciate the time again today, and we should have a flurry of guests over the next several weeks. I know it's been a little Mark and Jeff centric, which may be a little distasteful to the viewership. So we'll see if we can fix that and bring some smart people on that provide a different perspective.
Smarter than us is a good way to go for sure, Mark. But enjoy the conversation as always, man. Appreciate it.
Take care.